Hi everyone, this is Rosie. Today we're going to construct the Swoon Carter Messenger Handbag. This is actually the personal bag that I carry, and it is one of my favorite Swoon patterns. If you would like to sew along with me, I do have an affiliate link in the video description below for you to purchase the pattern. So let's get started. Now, as always, you always want to read through all of the pattern directions. This will help you get familiar with the construction, and it will also allow you to plan any changes that you want to make ahead of time. One thing you always want to make note of is down here on the front of the pattern it says, when printing, do not select fit to printable area or enlarge shrink in any way. Always print at actual size or 100%. Now, this is really important because if you don't follow this instruction right here, your bag is not going to be the proper size. This tells you how to print out your pattern pieces. Also, on one of the pattern pages, you're going to see a 2-inch registration square. Once you've printed out your pattern, measure that square in both directions, from top to bottom and side to side, to make sure that that square is actually 2 inches. That will tell you that your pattern has printed out the correct size. Now, I've made about 3 of these bags, and I'm actually going to make some changes here in the sew along. So I want to spend more time on the prep. And I'm going to go through each piece that I've cut so that you can see what I've done. So let's start with the additional cutting list. This you can find in step 1, page 2. It's also written on one of the pattern pieces. So right here I have my handle. It's made of cork, and I have not interfaced it with anything. I never fuse anything to my cork. Okay, then I have right here the closure straps, also cork, with no interfacing. And then here I have my shoulder strap. Now, instead of cutting it 4 inches wide, I've cut it 2 inches wide, and I'm going to be constructing my handle, I should say my strap, differently than what the pattern calls for. And what I have here is the 2-inch wide piece of cork, and the underside of the strap is going to be made from quilting cotton that's been fused with some woven fuse. And this piece here is also 2 inches wide. And then next, I have my strap holders. I find that the 2.5 inches by 1 inch is not quite long enough for me. It could be because I'm using cork and there's more thickness there. So instead of cutting it out 1 inch by 2.5 inches, I've cut mine 3 inches by 1 inch. Then I have my strap connectors. And instead of cutting those 1.5 inches by 3 inches, I've made mine 1.5 inches by 4 inches. And the holders and the connectors also are cork with no interfacing on the back. And then down here I have my zipper tabs. So let's move on to the next set of pieces. This piece here is for the main panel, and I'm using cork fabric. I find that the cork does not have enough body on its own to be used in the bag, so it does need to be interfaced, but I do not like to fuse to my cork. So what I did is I cut out the pattern piece, and you can see here's the back of the fabric. It doesn't have anything fused to it. So what I did next was I took a piece of Decoville and I cut out my Decoville using the pattern piece that she supplies for the fleece, okay? Now, the nice thing about this pattern piece right here is that she's already cut out the seam allowances for you. So I just cut out the piece, I laid it down, I traced it, I cut out my piece of Decoville, and then I cut out a piece of SF101 that's larger all around than the Decoville. And I fused them with the adhesive sides together. So the adhesive side of the Decoville is fused to the adhesive side of the SF101. So you can see here, I've already done that. They're already fused together. And then what I do is I take my ruler and I cut away right from this line here 1/2 inch all around. So I'm cutting away all of this extra waste here. And then once I have that all cut out, I take that piece. So here is the Decoville and the SF101 fused together with the excess cut off. It's just 1/2 inch seam allowances all around. And then I fused just the edges of this piece to my cork. Okay, so now my cork is still nice and supple. I don't like the way cork feels after it's been fused. And doing it this way allows the piece to be nice and supple and flexible, but you have your interfacing fused to it. And I don't mind having it fused just along the edges. And for this, I would only use the SF101. I wouldn't use the woven fuse because I believe it's too heavy for this application. Then the next piece is for my side panel. Same thing, I'm using cork. It has not been fused yet. And I did exactly the same thing I did for the main panel. I took the side panel fleece pattern and I cut out a piece of Decoville using the fleece pattern. Then I cut out a piece of SF101 larger than the side panel here, and I left enough space to give me my 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. And then again I took my ruler and I just trimmed away all of the excess, okay, which would leave me with the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and around the curve I just kind of eyeballed it. All right, then once I had that piece all cut out, I took my cork and I fused it. I fused the interfacing piece to the wrong side of the cork. So now this piece also is interfaced. And then I did the very same thing with the bottom. So she does give you a pattern piece for the fleece for the bottom, and I did exactly the same thing with this piece here. Next, let's talk about our lining pieces. Now I'm using 2 different fabrics for the lining. So this piece right here, I have 2 of them. One will be for the outer bag, and then this fabric right here will be for the dividing section in the middle that has the zipper pocket. Now, in the pattern, this is a drop-in lining. When she has you prepare it to make the drop-in lining, she has you turn under the top edge 1/4 of an inch. I find for myself 1/4 of an inch is not enough. So I wanted to turn this into a 1/2 inch seam up here, and I'll show you how I did that. So I started out with my fabric. I fused the entire piece with woven fuse. Then I took my pattern and I traced it all around, okay? So here are my markings. And then you already have your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance in the pattern piece itself. But what I did is I took a ruler and I just added 1/4 of an inch to the top, and I marked it with my pen. And now you've turned this into a 1/2 inch seam. Then I wanted to give it some additional interfacing. So I took a piece of Decoville and I traced my pattern out onto the Decoville and I cut it out. Now, when you're doing the cutting for your lining and for your Decoville, on the lining, you want to make sure that you mark the notch right here, but you do not want to cut out this notch, okay? But when you cut out the Decoville, you do want to cut out the notch, all right? So now, this piece right here is the exact size of the pattern piece. But what I did in addition is I took the Decoville and I cut off 1/4 of an inch, or I'm going to cut off 1/4 of an inch from the top. And you'll see why I'm doing this in a minute. Okay? So now that I've cut off that 1/4 of an inch, I want to take my Decoville and lay it down on top of my actual lining piece. I want to match up where the notches go. So I want to make sure that this notch is within my markings on the lining, okay? And because I've trimmed off 1/4 of an inch from the top of the interfacing. Now, from the top of the interfacing to the top of lining, I have a 1/2 inch seam. The reason why I did that is because now, when I take this pattern piece and I'm getting ready to set in the lining, I have to turn this piece under, and this gives me a natural 1/2 inch. I don't have to measure anything. All I have to do is turn it under and then press it down, and it makes life so much easier than having to go and measure everything out and then turn it under. Okay? Now, here are the pieces for my flap. This is going to be the outer flap. Again, it's cork, and I have not fused anything to the back of it. This is going to be the lining of the flap, and I have fused a piece of woven fuse on the entire back of the flap lining. And then I took the pattern piece that is for the flap fleece, and I cut out a piece of Decoville, and I just simply fused that to the back of the lining. Then lastly, I have here the zip pocket panel. Okay, so it's just my lining fabric, and I fused woven fuse to the back. Then I traced out the pattern on here, just like this. But what I did is I also added 1/4 of an inch to the top. So again, I just took my ruler. This would be the top of the pattern piece right here. I just added 1/4 of an inch. And the reason why I did that is because I added 1/4 of an inch to the lining pieces. Here I have my main accent panel and my handle connectors. They're both cork, and neither one of them has been interfaced. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in the prepping section is for my thread. I'm using the Gudeman Mara 70. Okay, this is a heavier weight thread, and I'll be using my Juki TL2010Q, which will accommodate this thread. If you're using a domestic machine, you might want to check with your manufacturer to see if you can use a heavier weight thread. If not, you'll have to choose a thread that's appropriate for your machine. And then for my closures, I'm actually going to be doing the closure with the press lock. So I have 2 of these. And the other thing I want to talk about is when we discussed fusing your Decoville to the SF101, we are fusing the 2 adhesive sides together. Okay? Now, here's the SF101. So this part right here that's facing up, that actually has adhesive on it. Okay, so when you're fusing, if you're worried about fusing and having an exposed adhesive side here, you can use a craft sheet. This is the Ranger non-stick craft sheet that you can get just about anywhere. And when you fuse it, you would put it down onto the craft sheet with the fusible side of the SF101 facing down. And you can fuse as much as you want. It will just peel right up because it will not stick to the craft sheet. So that's it for the prep work. Let's get on to the sewing. We're starting step 2, which is to create our handle. So this is the handle, and these are my handle connectors. The first thing that you want to do is mark a line straight down the center of both your handle and your handle connectors. And to mark it, I just used a chalk wheel. Then the next thing you'll do is take some double-sided sticky tape, and you're going to put a piece of tape on each side of the handle, right above and below that white line. And then you'll do the same thing to your handle connectors. Then after I have the tape in place, I just take a tool and I just make sure that it's adhering nicely. And then the next thing that you're going to do is remove the paper backing. You'll remove the paper from all of your pieces, and then after the paper is removed, you're going to fold the outer edges into the chalk line that you made. So just fold it over, and then you're going to press it down really well. Okay, then you'll fold in the other side to the center, and make sure that the 2 edges are butting up against each other. Then after I have those edges folded in towards the center, I'll just take a tool and really burnish it down well. You want to do the same exact thing to both of the handle connectors. Then after you have your edges folded in towards the center and secured down, you want to take your rectangular connectors and you're going to slip 2 of them onto the handle. Then you'll go over to the sewing machine and you're going to bring these 2 edges together. Make sure that they're not twisted. You want to bring them together and you'll just separate these enough so that you can make a 1/4 of an inch seam across the width of the handle. Here's my handle. I have it folded in half with the 2 ends of the handle clipped together. Now I did trim back the adhesive on all sides, so on this side and on this side, because if I try and sew over that, my presser foot will get stuck on it. I have some clips here just holding everything in place because I did have to spread this open. And as I said, the handle is folded in half, and it's folded in half with the finished sides together. So now we'll just sew our 1/4 of an inch seam, and you want to back stitch at both ends, and I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.5. Then after you've sewn that seam there, and I know it's probably hard to see because it's black on black, you want to finger press this seam open right here and lay it flat. Okay? And then you're going to reposition the edges to meet back in the middle again. Okay, and then you have to actually flip this. So you're going to flip it, turn it, so that now the good side, the finished side, is out. All right? And then you're going to move your rectangular rings, one to each end, and we're going to be sewing these 2 sides together. And we'll be sewing it with the good side facing out. Now I have everything in place on the handle. I have the 2 rectangular rings, one on each end. I have the seam that we sewed on this end close to the rectangular ring. And now we're going to sew a box around the handle. So you can start down the length, you're going to pivot, sew across, then sew down along this side, pivot, go across, and then you'll go a little bit again over your previous stitching. Now I'm going to be sewing mine 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and on my particular machine, if I use the center of the toe right here as my guide, that is approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the needle. And because we have some bulk here, I'm going to be sewing with a stitch length of 3.5. Make sure that all of your edges here are even. I'm not going to backstitch yet. I'm going to sew as close to this rectangular ring as I feel comfortable. Then I'll pivot. I'll sew across the width. Pivot again, and then we're going to sew down this side. Pivot again, So across. And then I'm going to go back to my original stitching, and I'll go over it, the previous stitching a few times, and then back stitch a few times. And there's the handle so far. Now here I have my handle connectors. This is the good side, and this is where I brought the edges together. And what we want to do is, from the good side, we want to top stitch 1/8 of an inch from each long edge. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. And you'll do that to both connectors, and then when you're done, you're going to take the connectors and you're going to slip it through the other side of the rectangular ring, and then all you need to do is baste the bottom ends together. Now when you sew on that handle connector, you want to make sure that the edges are together, okay? And sometimes if you start sewing off of the edge onto the handle, they can shift. So if you want to prevent them from shifting, start in the middle of the connector and just drop your needle down, and that will prevent it from shifting. So you can go forward a couple of stitches, then just go back to the edge, and then finish basting across. Okay, and that keeps your edges together. Here's what your handle should look like now. And you can see it here from both sides. Now, one little tip is where I join the thread together, you know, where I sewed over the previous stitching when I came back around, I always like to put a little drop of fray check on both sides where that stitching is. It's just a little bit of extra insurance to make sure that that stitching does not come out. Now we're on to step 3, which is to create the closure straps. So you want to do the same exact thing that you did when you created the handle. You want to mark a line straight down the center of the strap, okay? So you do that on both straps. And I did mine again with the chalk wheel. Then you want to put a piece of adhesive tape, double-sided adhesive tape, on both sides of that chalk line. And I did that on both, and I've already removed the paper on this one. And again, you're going to take those long edges and fold them in towards the center. Now once you're done folding the 2 long edges in towards the middle, you're going to fold the entire strap in half with the wrong sides together and with the edges right here meeting. Okay, then I like to hold it in with a few clips. Okay, and I have the other one already done. So this is what you should have right now. Now the next step is to connect the handle to the 2 closure straps. So you want to start by marking a line 2.5 inches from the top of each closure strap, and you're going from the raw edge, not the folded edge. So I have these chalk lines right here. That indicates my 2.5 inch markings. Then you're going to take the handle connectors and you're going to sandwich them in between the straps on each side. So I'm just going to place it in there for right now. I want to look and see where my line is. You want the top of the handle connector to be below that line, below the chalk line that I just made there. And then you can secure this in place. Now the handle connector should go at least halfway into the closure strap, okay? So I have it about halfway right there. And then I'm just going to take a larger Wonder Clip and hold that in place. Now, once I have it in place, right where I want it, I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew through all of the layers. Sew through both layers of the closure strap, I'll sew over the handle strap all the way down, pivot, sew across, and then back up. And this will be a top stitching that's about 1/8 of an inch away from the edges, and I will sew with a stitch length of 3.5. I'm only going to put on one at a time here. There's no sense in having one dangling off, so I'm just going to work on one side at a time. I'm about to start my top stitching. It's just going to be 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the strap, and I'll be using the center of this toe right here as my guide for my 1/8 inch, and I'm sewing with a stitch length of 3.5. And I am going to backstitch. When I get to the bottom, I will just pivot. I'm going to sew across the bottom fold there. And then I'll pivot again, and I'll sew up the other side. So there you go. The handle connector is securely caught within that seam there, within that top stitching. And now you just need to go and do the same exact thing to the other side. So here's my handle sewn to the strap connectors. And I just want to point out when you're doing this to make sure that your handle connectors are protruding out the same amount from each side of the strap closures. Now we're moving on to step 4, which is to create the flap. Now I'm going to do mine differently from the pattern. First of all, I am going to use rivets to hold down my, my strap closures and my handle here. What I have found, because I've made quite a few of these bags already, is that if I follow the directions and have my strap closures and my handles riveted to this before I sew on the lining, when I pick up the bag with the handle, the exterior flap will separate from the lining flap. And you can actually see that when you're carrying the bag. You see a little gap there. So what I'm going to do first is sew the lining to the exterior. And then once I've done that and turned it, then I will put on the strap closures and the handle. So all I'm going to do now is clip this together and go over to the sewing machine, and I will sew this on with a 1/2 inch seam. So here's the flap. I sewed the 1/2 inch seam all the way around. Then after I sewed the seam, I went and I clipped all the curves right through the lining and through the cork. Okay, so now I'm ready to turn it. And when you do this, you want to have like some kind of a tool, like a point turner or something, so that you can reach in there and get those edges to be nice and sharp. So you just take your point turning tool. You can use the round edge. I actually like to use the round edge. And then I just kind of roll it along the seam there. And then the other thing that you can do once it's all turned out is you can roll the exterior and the lining in between your fingers until you get that seam meeting right in the middle there. So just go ahead and work that all the way out, and then you'll go over to your iron, and since this is cork, from the press side I'm going to press the lining down really well, making sure that all my edges are nice and sharp, and then I'll go over to the sewing machine and top stitch all around the outside flap. I have my flap all turned out and pressed, and now I'm just going to top stitch. And I'm actually going to use the edge of the foot as my guide. So I'll run the edge of the foot along the edge of the flap. And I'll use a stitch length of 3.0. So you do want to back stitch. When you get to the curves, you just want to go slowly. If you go slowly enough, you shouldn't have to, lift the presser foot and pivot a little bit. So I just go slow, and it works itself around the curve. And you'll get a smoother line that way. And then back stitch at the end. So here's my flap after I've done the top stitching. Now I'm getting ready to put on my closure straps and my handle. And whether you're choosing to sew in those closure straps or use rivets, you have to make some markings first. So the first thing that you want to do is find the center of the flap, and I just chalked a line right down the center. Then from the center, I measured 3 inches out on each side from the center, and then I chalked a line here. And the last line I chalked was 2.5 inches from the top. So measure 2.5 inches down, and I chalked a line. Now, here are my closure straps. If you're sewing in the closure straps, you can draw a little box with an X, and those will be your sewing lines. And the straps will go to the outside of the lines that you drew here. So here's one line, goes to the outside right there. You would secure it down in place and sew around the box. And then the same thing for this one. That one would get placed on the outside of this line here, and you draw around the box. And then these two closure straps should be 6 inches apart from each other. So the space in between the straps should be 6 inches. And then you can refer to the directions. She would have you draw she would have you sew another line up from the bottom right around here. But I'm using rivets. So I'm actually going to use this same box because I want to put the rivet right in the center of this box here. So I'm going to punch a hole right where the X crosses itself. And that will be where I place my hole. So I'm just going to secure this in with some clips up here. And I'm just going to do one side at a time. I can secure the bottom here just to make sure that everything stays where it should stay. And then I will go over to my hole punch and press the hole right in the center. Then I'll put in the rivet, and once I have that rivet in, then I will do the other side. And one other step that you will want to do before you either sew or use rivets is you'll go over to your machine and just baste across the top of this strap here, and then you would of course baste this one in place. Okay? So I went ahead and I basted in the closure straps on each side. I put a long clip here just to hold everything in place, and I have 2 smaller clips down here. And now I'm just going to take my little punch and punch the hole for the rivet. Now, since the throat is not very large here, I just kind of fold this back a little bit. Just make sure that you're not folding over where you're going to punch the hole. And then I place the cutter right in the middle of that X, and then you're just going to press it hard. Now, You may have a different tool for doing this. You know, use whatever you have. And of course, if you're not using rivets, you just want to go ahead and sew the strap down. Okay, and then I will put in my post. And I need to punch just a little bit more. So I'll finish that, and I will go ahead and put in the rest of my rivets. I need to put one more over here. I just need to measure where that one needs to go. If you're going to sew your flap together like I did, keep in mind that you are going to have a lot more bulk when you're dealing with this. So if you want to avoid that, then you certainly can go ahead and put your closure straps on just the exterior flap the way she says to in the instructions, and then go ahead and construct the rest of the flap after the closure straps are on. Okay, now I'm getting ready to punch this hole here. Again, I'm just going to fold my flap back enough so that my punch can reach in there. And I'll get it right in the center of the X. And just so that you can see, you want to make sure that your flap is not caught under where you're going to be making that punch mark, okay? All right, and then you just go put in your rivet. So here's the flap with the closure straps and the handle in place. My rivets are in, and yes, the rivets do go through to the lining side. I'm totally fine with that. And actually, I think they look kind of nice. One thing you might want to do before you put the rivets in, like after you punch the hole and before you put the rivets in, is you might want to put a little bit of fray check on those holes there. But that's totally up to you if you want to do that. So there you go. I think that having the rivets go through the exterior and the lining is going to prevent the problem I've been having with the bag that I carry from separating from the lining, having the exterior separate from the lining when I pick the bag up by the handle. Now I'm ready to put on my thumb locks. So if you're using thumb locks, what you'll want to do is the center line that you drew before, down the center of the flap, you'll want to measure 3.5 inches out from that center mark on each side. So I have these chalk marks right here and here. And then you're going to take your thumb lock and you're going to center it over that line. So on each side, okay? And you'll want to make sure that your flap is covering it. Okay, now I'm not going to install these on camera because every thumb lock is different, so you will need to follow the instructions for the thumb lock that you are using. Now I'm going to sew the bag flap to the back exterior, and one thing I'd like to point out is that when you first look at this, it almost looks as if it's a perfect rectangle, but it's not. It actually tapers towards the top. So if you look at the lines on my mat here, you can see that on this end, they're slightly over this white line, and then up here, they're within the white lines. So that's the taper. Now, once you determine where the top of your exterior back is, you want to measure down 2 inches and you want to chalk a line. Then you'll need to find the center of the back here where you chalked your line. So I'm just going to mark my center right now, okay? And one way that you can always check to make sure that your center is correct, you can just measure from that line all the way out to each edge to see if your center is in the right spot. Now, the next thing you'll do is you'll take your flap and you need to find the center of the flap. So I have cut a very tiny, and I mean tiny, notch right where the center is. And you want to take that center marking and you're going to line it up with this 2-inch chalk line so that the raw edge of the flap is right up butting against that chalk line. You'll secure it in place, and then you're going to go over to your machine. You're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Now I'm going to use some of my longer Wonder clips to secure the flap to the back. I have the flap secured in place, and I'm getting ready to go and sew that 1/4 inch seam. Pinning the flap to the exterior is a bit of a challenge because you have a lot of bulk under there with those straps that you've put on. So I find that this is a good alternative for securing it in place, and of course as I'm sewing I'm going to make sure that I stay on the chalk line. And another thing that you can do is take your ruler and then just measure out from the tip of the flap to the edge to make sure that the distance is the same on both sides. And that's another way to ensure that your flap is centered. Now I'm going to sew down the flap, but I'm going to baste it in first, and I'll use a basting stitch of 4.0. And then if I decide I'm happy with the seam, I'll go ahead and sew it in permanently. You want to make sure that your flap stays on the chalk line. Okay, now that I'm happy with my basting, I'm just going to sew it in permanently with a stitch length of about 3. And I will back stitch at each end. Then what you'll want to do next is take a pair of scissors and you just want to clip the corner just a little bit, okay? So I'm going to do that at both ends. Alright, and then you'll take out all of your clips. And then you want to fold the flap up. Okay? And you're going to top stitch 3/8 of an inch away from the edge of the flap here. I'm going to do this top stitching with a stitch length of 3.5 right now. And I will be sewing over the straps. The idea is to be in far enough so that when you're done sewing the top stitching that you will have encased the seam that's under here. Now when you get to here you can lift up your presser foot to make sure that you're going to go over the strap. Probably take another stitch before I can do that. There you go. Okay, now your top stitching is done. Here's the flap now all sewn on to the back exterior. I have my top stitching done. I could have probably come in a little bit closer, but my seam that I created to attach the flap to the exterior is completely enclosed now by that top stitching, and that's how you want it to be. Okay, now I'm getting ready to put on the main panel accents. So I have the front of the bag here. And you want to remember when you're working that there's that slight taper. You want the shorter end to be the top. Now the first thing that you want to do with this piece is find the center and mark a line. You can do that just by taking the pattern piece and laying it down, and where the fold is, that will be the center. And then from the center you're going to mark 2 3/4 inches from each side of the center. So 2 3/4 inches this way, 2 3/4 inches this way, and then you'll mark these lines. And then you need to mark a line 3 inches up from the bottom of the panel. Then you're going to take your main panel accent, and your strap holder, and you'll draw a line straight down the center on both pieces, and then you'll put a piece of that two-sided adhesive tape on each side of that center line, and then remove the paper and fold the long edges towards the center, just like we did before. You'll do it on the main accent, and you'll also do it for the strap holder. Okay, so now I have one that I've already prepared here. So you can see I already have everything folded in towards the center, and then I also put a piece of double-sided sticky tape on the wrong side because I'm going to use that to help adhere it into place. Now, I also have my strap holder here. And if you remember, I cut this piece longer than the pattern requires. And the reason why is because I want to have enough to be able to fold it under and then be able to catch these two ends here in my seam line, in my top stitching. But I also want it to be enough so this kind of bows out. Maybe you could see it better that way. It's bowing out. And the reason why I need it to bow out quite a bit is because my straps are quite thick. So you can kind of test things out a little bit by putting your strap in there, okay, and then just seeing exactly how much room you need, okay? You don't want it to be too tight or it's going to be very hard to get that strap in there under the strap holder. So now I'm going to take the clips off of here and we'll peel off the paper from each side. So now I have the paper peeled off, and all I'm going to do now is lay this along the chalk line. Want to get it on nice and straight. Okay, and stick it down. And then I'll just lift up enough to get my strap holder in there. And you want the strap holder to be at the top of this 3-inch line right here. So I'll stick it under, and then I'll turn it over to the other side and slip it under on the other side. Okay, and then you can always test once you have it stuck down there, see if your strap goes in there easily. And it does. If it doesn't, you would just reposition. Now what we'll do is we'll go over to the sewing machine, and you're actually going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from each of these long edges, and you'll sew right over that strap connector. Now you have to keep in mind that when this is in here, you're going to have this sewn down 1/8 of an inch, and you'll have to decide whether or not, once it's sewn down with that inch top stitching, if this will still fit in comfortably. I'm going to do my top stitching. I'm using a stitch length of 3.5, and I'm using the center of the toe there as my 1/8 inch guide. So I'll let the center of the toe ride right along the fold here. You want to back stitch. And when I get to where the strap connector is, I want to make sure that it's kind of being pushed towards the opposite side. And I am going to back stitch over that. And then back stitch at the end. Okay, now you'll go ahead and sew the opposite side. This time I'll be using the toe on this side of the foot as my guide. Back stitch. And then again, as I get to this strap holder here, I'll just push it over to this side here. And I'm going to back stitch over it. And back stitch at the bottom. So here it is, and my loop should be bowing out a little bit so that I can get that strap underneath the strap holder. And now you want to go ahead and do the same thing to the other side of the panel. So here we are with the accents in and the strap holders in, and my straps fitting in nicely. So the bag is starting to take shape now. Now we're moving on to step 6, which is to prepare the side panels. So I already have one done. I have my D-ring on, and I've secured it down, not just with the stitching, but also with 2 rivets. So what you'll want to do is take the piece that is going to be used for your strap connectors, and you'll do the same thing you've been doing all along. You're going to score a line right down the center of the piece, and then you're going to put a piece of sticky tape on both sides of that line. And I already have removed the paper from one side, and now I'll just remove it from the other side. And then you're going to fold the 2 long edges into the center. So right where you made that center mark. Press it down nice and firm. Okay, and then once you have that done, you can slip the D-ring onto it. Okay, and then you're going to kind of fold it in half. But I like this side, the side that's near the D-ring, to be a little bit longer here. So I'm not folding it perfectly in half. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is because I want to have enough room for my stitching plus the rivet. Okay? So I'm just going to make sure that I have enough space on both sides of where this opening is to be able to put in a rivet. Now, to prepare this piece here, you want to find the center, and you can do that again with your pattern piece. The fold of your pattern piece would be the center, and then I marked 3 inches down from here. And then to hold these ends down, I'm going to put another piece of sticky tape right around there. Then I'll peel back the tape, and then once I have the tape pulled off, I'll just secure the 2 ends down. Okay, and then I'm going to put one more piece of sticky tape here so that I can hold it in place as I'm sewing. And then after your tape is off, you're just going to position it. The top of the connector here should be right at that white line. Okay, and then just make sure that it's centered this way. And now we'll go over to the machine and sew it down. I'm actually going to sew over this twice because this is a connector that's going to get a lot of stress on it if you're using your shoulder strap. So I'm going to sew down one side across, up the other side across, and then I'll do that again a second time. So now I'm sewing on my connector, and I'm just going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.5. Pivot. I could take one more stitch. And again, you just want to go as close to that D-ring as you're comfortable. And then we'll go around it a second time. Now we're on to step number 7, which is the exterior. So we're going to sew the bottom and the sides to our main panels here, okay? So I have my bottom piece right here, and all you want to do is pin the bottom to the front and the back, right sides together. So I'm just going to start with my front panel. I'm just going to clip it in place. And then I'll go over to the machine and I'm going to sew 1/2 inch across. Now I'm not going to do that on camera, it's just a straight seam. And once you're done sewing the bottom to the front panel, then you're going to sew the back panel to the opposite side of the bottom. So here's what I have now. I have both the back and the front panels sewn to the bottom panel. They were sewn together with a 1/2 inch seam. And then I just moved these seams towards the center. I didn't do it with my iron, again, because it's cork. I just did it with my hands. And then from this side, I just top stitched 1/8 of an inch away from these seams. And I did my top stitching on the bottom panel, not on the main panels here. Now I'm going to start attaching my side panel to the main panel here. So I have marked the center of the side and the center of the bottom. And you want to start out by matching your center marks. Okay? And I'm going to use a few staples in there. And the reason why I'm using the staples is because between the cork and the Decoville that I put in here, I have a lot of structure, so I need something that's really going to hold everything into place. Then I'm going to fold this part around, and I'm going to staple the top in place. Okay? Get that edge nice and even. I'll put a few staples in there. You want to stay out of your seam line, wherever that's, you know, that where that 1/2 inch seam line is going to be. Make sure that you don't put any staples there. Now, this is definitely the hardest part of the bag, especially because I'm using cork. And this actually is just a mini craft stapler that I'm using here, which works really well. And then you'll just start stapling up the side. Okay, you want to make sure that this piece, that you're not getting any puckers in it. You want to make sure that that stays flat. Okay, and then just ease the rest of it in here. If you have to remove a couple staples to get everything to lay in there nicely, that's fine. This is one part of the bag that you really want to take your time with. So you're going to do that, and then you'll start pinning from the next side. You're going to have to get your flap out of the way there. And then start stapling the other side into place. So now I have my first side stapled into place. The most difficult part is around these curves here, but as you're doing it, if you just keep pushing it, you know, in this way, kind of curving it around your fingers and pushing it in, you should get it to fit in there pretty nicely. And this part, definitely, like I said, is the hardest part of the bag, and it's a bit of work. but if you just take your time with it, everything will work out well. And then as far as the staples go, you can see the position I put them in. I find that if you put them in this way and you use the mini stapler, it holds better. So you can see right there how they're put in. And then once I'm done sewing my seam, I can usually trim all the staples away because we have to trim down that seam anyway. So I'm ready to start sewing this in place, and this is a seam that you really want to take your time with. I'm going to start by basting it in first, and once it's done, if I'm happy with how everything went, then I'll go in and sew it down with a permanent stitch. So I'm using a basting stitch of 4.0. Okay, and you're going to be sewing a 1/2 inch away from the edge. Make sure you stay away from the staples. When you get to the part where the curve is, you can actually start lifting the bag up so that it's standing straight up, and that will help you to sew across the curve and across the bottom. You also want to check underneath, make sure that nothing's getting puckered up under there. I'm just going to straighten up my bottom now so that it's laying flat. The bag is actually standing up now on its bottom. Okay, now I'm just going to check my seam to see how it looks. So everything looks good. So all I'm going to do now is sew it in with my permanent stitching, and I'm going to use a stitch length between 2.5 and 3. I'll just follow over that line of basting that I just did. So here's my first side panel all sewn in. I did have to remove some of the staples manually, and I trimmed it down to almost 1/8 of an inch here. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew in the other side. I started stapling in the second side, and I always put some staples along the bottom first and then down the side, and then to get the curve to fit in, you just want to cup it, okay, and then ease it in as you work your way up, and put your staples in as you go along. All right? So here is the second side stapled into place, and you can see how everything in here is all laying flat, and this is what it looks like on the other side. Okay? And that's how you want it to look. Just take your time. So here's the outside of the bag so far. It's the front, and here's the back view, and here's the side view. Now, I'm going to open this up, and you can see what it looks like on the inside. Okay, so that's how it looks on the inside. And now the next thing you want to do is turn these edges down by 1/2 of an inch. And because of the way I did the Decoville, I actually have a natural 1/2 inch built in here, so all I have to do is fold the edges over the Decoville and put it in place. And this is in preparation of putting in the drop-in lining. Now we are on step 8, which is to create the center pocket. So I have my zipper here. I've cut it to size. The zipper needs to be 8 inches long with the zipper tabs on it. So you're going to take your zipper tabs and you're just going to take the ends and fold them into the center and press. And then you're going to fold the entire piece in half with those folded edges together and press. And then you're going to take that tab and slip it on the end of your zipper. Okay? And then you can go over to your sewing machine and you're just going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the fold. And you want to make sure that you catch the fold on both sides when you do your stitching. So I'm going to go sew mine off camera. And then we'll come back and work on the lining. I have my zipper tab sewn onto my zipper now, and I made sure that I caught the folds with the stitching on both sides. And now our next step is to take our lining pieces. I have my 4 lining pieces here, and I'm using 2 different fabrics for my lining. The first thing that you want to do is fold back the top. Now, remember, I took 1/4 of an inch off of my Decoville, and I added 1/4 of an inch to the actual lining piece. So that gave me a 1/2 inch space right here. All right? And because of the way I've done this, I don't have to measure anything to turn this under. It's just going to fold naturally right along the top edge of that Decoville. So I did that, I folded it down and I pressed it. Now, the next thing that you'll want to do is take the little V notches. Remember, you didn't want to cut out the lining, but you did want to cut out the Decoville. And you're going to fold your lining right sides together here. Okay? And have the edges of the Decoville line up with each other. And you can actually kind of feel it naturally if it's lining up properly because of the thickness of the Decoville. All right? And then you want to clip that in place. And you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you're going to sew this dart in place. And you're going to sew right on the line that you made or right along the edge of the Decoville. Okay? And you're going to do that to all 4 pieces, so you have 8 darts all together to sew into place. Now I'm ready to sew down these darts, and I'm going to stitch with a stitch length of 2.5, and you want to back stitch at both ends. Okay, so there you go. You can see that my stitching line is right at the edge of the Decoville on both sides there. Now go ahead and sew all 8 of those darts. Here's one of my linings with the darts sewn into place, and you can trim these down if you want to about 1/8 of an inch. It's up to you. Personally, it doesn't really matter to me one way or the other. So there you go, those are clipped. And now the next thing that we need to do is put our zipper into the first panel here. Now, what you want to do is find the center of your panel. And I have that indicated with this black mark right here. You can see it's right there. And then you want to measure 4 inches out from the center. And I put another black mark right here. And then 4 inches out from the center to the other side, and I have a black mark right here. And then your zipper should fit right in between those black marks. Okay? Just like that. Now, because I've added a 1/2 of an inch on here, the directions would want you to sew this 1/4 of an inch away from the top. But because I've added a 1/2 of an inch on here, the directions would want you to sew this 1/4 of an inch away from the top. But I'm actually going to sew mine 1/4 of an inch down from the top because I added 1/4 of an inch, if that makes any sense. So I've drawn a line right here. You can see there's a black line there. Okay, and that is where I'm going to pin my zipper to. So you want the right side of your zipper pinned to the right side of your lining, and the right side of the zipper is the side that has the zipper pull on it. So I'm going to start right over here where this black line is, and I'm going to have the edge of the zipper tape going along the line that I marked 1/4 of an inch from the top. So I will just pin that in place with my Wonder Clips. And now I have the end of my zipper tab lining up with the black line that I put there. That's the line that's 4 inches away from the center. And then once you have it clipped into place, you can go ahead and sew it down with a 1/4 of an inch seam. So you're going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the zipper tape if you've done yours the same way that I've done mine. Okay? So right here you can see this is the black line that I marked. That's 4 inches away from the center, and here's the black line that I marked where I want to place the edge of my zipper tape. Okay, so I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from my zipper tape. And you want to back stitch at both ends. And I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.5. I'm making sure that my zipper tape is staying right along the edge of that black line as I sew. And as I get near the zipper pull, I just lift up my presser foot and I pull the zipper open. And now I can finish sewing across. So here's one side of the zipper sewn down, and now when I fold back the lining, that 1/2 inch, you can see right here that my seam line is right where the fold is, which is where it should be. Next we need to sew one of the pocket panel linings to the zipper. Now if you look at your piece here, you have these notches in the edge. The length of this notch is just 7 inches. And the length of your actual zipper that's exposed here is 7 inches. The zipper is 8 inches with the tabs added on. You want this notched part, this part right here, only to be pinned where the zipper is, not over the zipper tabs. Okay? So you're going to place this right sides together. So it'll be the right side of the pocket lining to the wrong side of the zipper. And you're going to take the notch right there. Okay, and that is going to line up with the end of your zipper tab. And then you're going to clip it in place. And you're going to clip it all along to the other side. And then your notch here should be lined up with the end of the zipper tab right here. Okay, and then you're going to go over to the machine and you're going to sew this over the same line of stitching that you created when you sewed in the zipper. Okay, so here's the pocket lining pinned into place, and these edges here are lining up with the edge of the zipper tab. Okay, and I'm just going to turn it over, and I'm going to follow my line of stitching that I created when I sewed in the zipper on the other side. Still using a stitch length of 2.5. I'm getting to where my zipper pull is, so I'm going to lift my foot up, pull the zipper open, and then I'll finish sewing to the edge. Okay, so you can see here I only have this notch part sewn down, and it's sewn again between the zipper tabs. Then we're going to press this back, so you're going to fold it back just like this, and then you're going to press this down, okay, and then we'll go ahead and we will top stitch just along where the zipper is, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Now we're going to top stitch just 1/8 of an inch away from this edge here, and we'll go from the end of the zipper tab to the end of the other zipper tab. But you need to be careful when you're doing your top stitching that you're not getting this part caught underneath your stitching. So you might want to either pin that out of the way or just hold it out of the way as you're sewing. So I'm going to just turn it over now. And I'm going to use a stitch length of 3.0, and then I'll back stitch, I want to fold that other end out of the way now a little bit just so I don't catch it in my top stitching. Okay, and see, I don't have it caught in my top stitching there. All right, so that's how it should be, just like that. Okay, so now you want to take your second lining piece and you're going to pin that to the zipper just the way you did for this side, and then when you're done sewing that into place, you'll sew on the second pocket lining exactly the way you did on this side. Now I just wanted to remind you that if you've prepared your pieces, your lining pieces, the same way that I've prepared mine, you want to sew the edge of that zipper tape 1/4 of an inch down from the top of the lining. Now I'm getting ready to put the second pocket panel in place, and when you do that, when you pin this up here, you want to make sure that these edges are in line with each other. Like, you don't want anything to be skewed, okay? So just pin it along the top the same way that you did the other one, but then just double check to make sure that these edges are together as far as the pocket is concerned. Okay? So now I have the zipper sewn to the two inner lining pieces, and the pocket is here in the middle. All right? But what we need to do next is sew the edges of the pocket together. So you'll open this up. These are your two pocket pieces. You're going to bring all of the edges together and clip into place. Okay. And then you're going to clip your sides together here. But now you're not going to be sewing all the way up to where the zipper is, but you'll be sewing as closely to the zipper as you possibly can get. And you're going to be sewing with a seam allowance of 1/2 inch. So clip in both sides, and then we'll go over to the sewing machine and sew this in. Alright, so I'm ready to sew these pocket sides together. You're only going to be sewing the 3 sides, and the way I like to do it is I like to start in the middle of the back. Okay, so I'm going to sew with a stitch length of 2.5. and you're sewing a 1/2 inch seam, And then I'm going to pivot, and I think I could go a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam up this side. You want to be careful that you don't catch your lining in this sewing here. I'm also going to open my zipper just to make it a little bit easier. Okay. You want to sew as close to the zipper as you can possibly get without sewing into the zipper. And then when you think you can't go anymore, just backstitch. Okay, now I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to start from the center back here and up. And the reason why I do it this way is because it just makes it easier to get close to the zipper if you're going towards the zipper as opposed to away from the zipper. If that makes any sense. Okay, I'm just going to pull my linings out of the way just a little bit. I think I have to move my zipper tab, my zipper pull. And again, I'll go as close to the zipper as I can get. Okay, so I have the 2 pocket lining pieces sewn together, and you can see here how far I was able to go. So that's how far I went on this side, and that's how close to the zipper I got on this side. You're not going to be able to go all the way up to the top, but this is more than enough. So you should be fine with that. Now the next step would be to take the other pieces of lining. They're the ones, of course, that do not have the zipper on them. And we're going to attach them to the linings that have the zippers. So the seams that we folded down before, you want those to be open. And we're just going to clip all around this U shape here. Okay, when you get to these 2 seams right here where the darts are, you want them to oppose each other. And what I mean is, I'm going to have this seam going out this way, the seam allowance, and the seam allowance on this one will be pointing in this direction. And that actually helps the 2 seams lock together when you do that. So you can push them together and you'll feel them lock, and then just put a clip on them. So clip all around, and then we'll go to the sewing machine and we'll sew this. Okay, so again here, I'm going to have one seam going this way, and the other seam will point that way, and they'll lock together. And then just clip them. Okay, so I'm going to finish clipping this, and then I'll go over to the sewing machine. So now I'm going to sew the 2 lining pieces together. Make sure that the lining piece on the other side is completely out of the way. And again, where we folded back for the drop-in lining, you want to have that open right now. And we're just going to sew a 1/2 inch away from the edge. I'm using a stitch length of 2.5, and you want to back stitch at both ends. And you're just going to follow the curve around. Make sure that your top edges are unfolded here. And backstitch. Once you check your seam to make sure that it's good, then you can go ahead and trim this seam allowance down to about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. Okay? And then you want to go ahead and sew the other lining piece to the opposite side. Okay, both sides of the lining sewn in here. Okay, there's a pocket in the middle. And I just want to show you, I trimmed my seams, but I don't trim at the top. And I find that it's just easier to work with everything if I have my full seam allowance here. Okay? Now before we can drop this into the bag, we need to make a mark that's 1 1/4 inches from this seam. So we're going to mark 1 1/4 inches in this direction, and I'm just going to use a pin to do that. So I have about 1 1/4 inches right there. And these 1/4 inch markings are going to indicate our stopping and starting points when we're sewing this lining into the bag. So mark all 4 sides. You can mark this however you want. I think a pin works just fine. So go ahead and finish marking all 4 sides. Now we're going to take our lining and drop it into the bag. And this is always an exciting moment. Okay? So we want to be able to take this top folded edge here and clip it to the top folded edge of the exterior. But the Wonder clips are not strong enough to hold it. So instead I'm just going to use some small binding clips. So the first thing that we want to do is match up our side seams. So we take the side seam of the lining and we match it up to the side seam of the exterior bag. Make sure that those folded edges are even, and you're going to put in a clip. Okay? And then you'll move to the other side and you're going to match up this side seam of the lining to the side seam of the cork, the outer bag. Okay. And then you're going to clip all along the back length here. Those clips are nice and strong. They'll hold everything in place as you're sewing. The Wonder clips tend to pop off because they're just not strong enough. And if you have to move things around a little bit to ease everything in, that's fine too. Okay, but it's important that those two folded edges are together. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more easing there, but then what you also want to do is this pin right here, this is where you're going to start sewing. So I'm going to put a clip in there. Okay, to hold all that together. And then I also want to put a clip on the side where I'm going to stop sewing. So where this pin is right here, that's where I'll stop sewing. And I'm going to put a clip in there also. Okay, so we can go over to the machine and start sewing this. I'm just going to ease in a little bit more and then we'll go over to the machine and sew this in. Okay, now you're going to have to do your best to maneuver the bag into the machine. Again, if you're using the materials and interfaces and interfacing that I'm using, it is going to be a bit of a challenge. All right? If you're using the interfacings that are recommended in the instructions, you won't have as much trouble. So I already got this started. I'm just going to take a few stitches forward and back. And I want to stay near where that pin is. And you will have to do some squishing of your bag, but that's okay. It's not going to hurt the bag. And then just sew along. I'm sewing actually with about 1/4 of an inch seam, a scant 1/4 of an inch from the top of the bag. And I can do that because I made my my seam allowance there 1/2 of an inch. If you have a cylinder machine, this is a great time to use it. And make sure that your flap is out of the way. Okay, once you get to the straightaway of the bag, it's not quite as bad. And really the trick of doing this with all of this structure in this bag are these clips. And squish wherever you need to squish, just to make sure that everything is fitting underneath that needle. This side is the tougher side to do too because it has the flap back here. The other side is not quite as hard. And I am sewing with a stitch length of 3.5. Just keep maneuvering as much as you need to do your stitching. And we're almost near the pin, and that's where we're going to stop. Okay, we're good. So here's my stitching in here, and now you just want to clip the front lining to the front of the bag and stitch that side. So here's the bag. There's the front, the back, and the side. And here is the lining sewn into place. Now, these gaps here, what the instructions tells you to do is to go over the sewing machine and sew these edges closed, but that's not really possible with the materials I'm using. So what I am going to do is just push these sides in like this, and then I'll put a rivet right here, and then whatever is still exposed, I'll just do a little bit of hand stitching to close that up. Now we're on the last step, step number 10, which is to prepare the shoulder strap. So if you remember, I had one piece of cotton quilting fabric that I cut out at 2 inches wide. So I scored a line down the middle, drew a line down the middle, and then I folded both edges in towards that center line, okay? And I pressed it. And then I did the same thing for the cork. I drew a line down the center of the 2-inch piece of cork, and then I folded both edges in towards the center. Now, my cork strap, I believe, is 46 inches long, and this one here, this piece here, is about 2 inches shorter, so about 44 inches long. Then once I finished folding all my edges in, I took the ends, okay, so here's the end of the cork and the end of the quilted cotton, and I sewed them together with a 1/4 inch seam. And then I will finish folding these all in towards the center. And I did that at both ends, so this was one end of it, and here is the other end of it, sewed together with a 1/4 inch seam. Now, what I want to do is have this folded over, okay, so that the fabric will be on the bottom side of the strap. And what I'm actually doing now is I'm going to clip both the cotton and the cork together with the wrong sides together. And the wrong side will be where I folded them in towards the center. And then I'll do that all along the length. And once I'm done, I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew with 1/8 inch top stitching all the way down and back up. And that is going to give me a finished edge here. So I won't have any raw edges when I put on my hardware. So I'm going to finish clipping this, and then when I'm done clipping it, I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and do that top stitching. So here's the strap now, and I have the two sides clipped together. So this is the cork side, and this is the cotton quilting side. And one thing you want to be careful of is when you sew those two ends together, both the cotton and the cork, make sure that the length of it does not get twisted when you sew down your ends. Okay, so now I'm just going to go over to the machine. I'm going to do top stitching 1/8 inch away from the edge. Here's the strap with all of the top stitching done, and you can see because of the way I did this, I have a nice finished edge here. Now I'm just going to slip on my hardware and put in some rivets, and we'll put it on the bag. Here is the bag all completed, and I did finish my shoulder strap. So that's what that looks like, and here's what it looks like on the other side. Now, I just had a few finishing comments. If you're going to make this bag exactly the way I did, meaning using the same materials and the same interfacings, you will need to use a heavier duty machine. Okay? You will not be able to handle this on a regular domestic. But if you're using the materials suggested in the pattern, I don't think that you would have a problem making this bag on a domestic at all. Another thing I wanted to point out is I really didn't talk very much about the press locks here because each press lock is different. So you need to follow the directions for installing the press lock that you've purchased if you're doing the press lock. Now, I would like to say one thing. As you saw in the video, I put the press part of the lock on first, okay? When I put on this part down here, what I do is I take this piece and I insert it into the press lock, okay? And I do that on both sides. And then I close the flap and I look to see where these pieces want to go. You can see on mine, they're not completely centered. If I had followed the pattern and put them completely in the center, I would have a problem closing my flap. You know, I'd get some wrinkling or buckling here. So I always like to see not where they're supposed to go based on the pattern, but where they want to go, if that makes any sense. Then the last thing I want to show you is to close up these ends here. I did put a rivet in on each side. Okay, and what I'll do next is I'm just going to take a few little stitches here just to close up the rest of that gap. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed sewing along with me, and I hope that you liked the video. Please like and subscribe.